Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji. Welcome back to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. This week, Joji and I wanted to jump into the discussion about the division of labor in a marriage or in a relationship for that matter, and how that kind of looks nowadays. We had looked at a couple of articles that said that the trends are changing. And I'll let Joji speak to the statistics of that, but a lot of times what we're seeing is that there are a lot more families out there with two parents or two individuals working in the household. So, what used to be the trend was that the husband or the partner, there was one partner that was a breadwinner, and the other partner stayed at home and managed the household and things like that. And so, part of this hits home for me a lot of because I think that has a lot of it takes a lot of mental capacity to run a household, the various tasks. And we've talked in the past, I also have 4 children. I work full time in a very stressful position. And so managing all of the things, it results in me asking my husband in particular. So bringing it back to my personal experience for a lot of assistance in a lot of different ways. Yet he does a lot of things that I think even my own parents didn't have really that division of labor, and so we're seeing a shift to some equality in that realm, but there's definitely differences. And so Joji and I wanted to piece that apart. So, Joji, I've launched us into this discussion, but what are some of your initial thoughts with this particular topic about the division of labor?
I think that even though we're seeing that there are more two parent households and that the division of labor probably is more equal now than it has ever been, just based on how long it's been that women have been entering the work world and how that's been steadily rising. I think that the research clearly shows that even though all that is true and the division of labor is more fair now, women are just more mentally exhausted because they do keep the family schedule. They're responsible for keeping track of everything, whether it's activities, social commitments, the things to do. And so I think that the mental exhaustion is something that may be overlooked in terms of how do women deal with the realities of the split. And I think I discovered a long time ago that I don't know if a 50-50 marriage would actually ever exist in all reality. I think about the fact that when children are not feeling well, they want their mother. If they get hurt, they want their mom typically. And they're always checking in with mom. And mom is in many ways their primary caregiver. And just for nutritional needs, babies depend on the mom. And if you're a nursing mom, you're tied to your baby. And so I feel like just biologically, women have a different kind of relationship with their children. And as much as the husbands may do for the relationship, for the family, it always ends up being a little bit more slanted towards the dependency on the mom. And since you're in the throes of that right now, how do you respond to that claim that I make?
I would say that's where I am at. I think that being a nursing mom right now, so my youngest is about almost 7 months old, and it is taxing. There's a lot of things that it's funny to me because I've had a lot of questions of should I continue nursing? I've had 4 kids, and it's something that I'm not ready to let go of, but also it's very hard because there has to be this extra brain process of, okay, I'm going to go out, but how long until the baby needs to eat again? Can I get away for a couple hours, or do I need to bring her with me to make it easier? Like, I have an appointment this evening, and so she's with me because I thought by the time I get home, she'll be ready to settle down for bedtime. And so it's just easier for me to take her with me as opposed to pumping again this evening. I pump at work. I mean, that particular piece, but I think overall, globally, I feel like there is a lot of mental load that goes into managing a household. And I think that mental load really does impact, and like you said, primarily women. And this, because she's going to talk too on the podcast. Um, but I think that it does impact us because of that particular mental load.
Yep. And I agree. And I didn't even think about the pumping and how you have to fit that into your workday when you go back to work after your maternity leave. But then the one thing that I've also thought about is the fact that as a woman who is in charge of running a household, I think our minds are always like a couple steps ahead of the game, which is where I think the exhaustion comes in. So I think about that. The example I use is I'm lucky my husband's retired, so he cooks dinner during the week and on the weekends, and that's my responsibility for cooking. And so, like for me, I start thinking about the weekend prepping for the dinners. By Thursday, I'm making sure I know what I'm making or do I have all the ingredients. And so, whereas my husband, we have a meal plan that food gets delivered to us. So, all the ingredients and everything is in the fridge. It gets delivered on Mondays and then he makes dinner. And so, like for as far as he's concerned, he just reaches into the fridge and picks out one meal, and then whatever that is what he's going to make, and everything is contained in there. Whereas for me, I'm thinking about what do I have in my house? Do I have to defrost anything? What are the things that I need? And it's not necessarily that the process is different. It's just the pieces are all assembled for him. Whereas for me, I'm thinking on my feet. And even maybe the weekend before that, I need to know if I need to buy more chicken or do I want to buy some ground beef or whatever it is, because I go shopping once a week and I don't want to stop off in the middle of the week to go grocery shopping because I didn't think ahead. And so I think that's like a small example of the way that men and women might approach it differently. And even though you might be doing the same tasks, the burden of that is a little bit different because of the way that we approach things that way. I also think that in terms of scheduling and in terms of having a plan for the family for the week, I think that ends up being on our plate. So we need to know what the activities are, where the kids need to be, where one partner is going to be, where the other partner is going to be, and when we're all going to be together. And then you've got family activities that you might be, if you're having family visit you or you're going to visit to somebody else's house for dinner or for a play date or whatever. And then there's all the household tasks of like laundry and grocery shopping and paying the bills. And I just wonder if all of that is really separated by role or if the woman might be more responsible for delegating some of those things. And so I do think that's where the mental exhaustion comes in. My mental exhaustion is thinking about the big picture and keeping all the pieces moving. Whereas I think that it's easier if you know you've got these things to do and they're organized for you in some manner. Not to say that's completely my life. Dan and I have a much more equal relationship now because we don't have any children and everybody's out of the house and it's just the two of us. So that in itself is a very different sort of situation. And so we are much more equal because he's at home most of the day and I am not. But when I think about when we did have a child at home and there were after school activities and social commitments and all the things that you do when your kids are in elementary school, middle school, high school, even college. There's just a lot of organization that needs to happen. I know that I've covered a lot of ground there, but what else can you think about, Alyssa, in terms of what you're experiencing and what we're trying to look at all the different aspects of the division in labor when it comes to between spouses or partners in a relationship?
Yeah, so there's a couple of 2 different things that came to mind. The first one was, and I know this kinda goes way back to the beginning of our podcast and one of the earlier episodes, we were talking about the differences in brain functioning and the way that women think versus men think and how we see things differently. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And so, like, we have a family calendar, and I check the family calendar, like you were saying. Every Sunday night, I'm looking at the family calendar, looking ahead. Okay, who needs to be where? How do I get that child to their practice or wherever they need to go? Who do I need to call I'm the one always texting the other parents to ask them about, can you take this child to practice? Because I need to take the other child to Lego robotics class. And so my husband will get up in the morning and say, what's going on today? And I'm like, it's in the family calendar. And he's, yeah, I didn't look at it. So it's a very different, we both have access to it. We both can use it, but we use it very differently. He uses it as, okay, let me look 5 minutes before, but I'm definitely planning and I'm more of an organizer planner anyway. So I think some of that is just in my nature. And the other part that I was thinking about is that we maneuver through all of these different things, but I think that it definitely depends on how you divide that labor. So you were talking about how you do dinner and things like that. But I think that I have in the past offered my husband to take over things, but then he'll do it differently than I do. And sometimes I'll come back and say, you know what? I'll just take care of it. And that's again part of my personality, but that's something that I've had to work out of my system. He doesn't fold clothes the same way I do. And I've had to say, that's okay. It's not the end of the world because I need that help. I need that extra assistance because he likes to do the laundry, but he won't fold it. And so I'll end up with 4 baskets of clothes in the room. And I'm like, okay, I can't sit here and fold 4 baskets of clothes tonight. I have other things I need to do. It's about division of labor, but it's also about giving up some control and being able to accept that and say, you know what? Maybe it's not done how I would do it, but that doesn't make it wrong. And I think that goes along with my children as well. And I'm not by any means sitting here saying I'm good at that. That is definitely a learning curve for me. But I think I'm getting worn down over time because as we have each new child, he puts the clothes on differently. He puts the diapers on differently. And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. It's good enough. He puts the baby in certain clothes that I wouldn't put her in. But you know what? That she's dressed. It's one of those things where you have to also recognize that if you want to have full control over everything, you could be overloading yourself by default. And I think you can only do that for so long.
Yeah, I agree with you because my example in the house is with cooking. I've always done the cooking, and Dan was a novice at cooking. And so when I would come home when he was making dinner, he felt very stressed out when I was hovering in the kitchen. And he would just say, hey, why don't you just leave, go change your clothes, whatever. He said, because I know you're second guessing everything I'm doing. And I was trying to be helpful, but then of course, I think that just adds pressure and that mental stress. And so then when he would say, okay, just go change your clothes and whatnot, then I've been relieved of the burden to help out. And then I don't feel like I'm not helping. But then he'll call me back when I'm done changing or whatever. And then he's like, oh, if you want to set the table or whatever, to exactly your point, because it's going to turn out different, but it's going to be edible and it's going to be a fine dinner. And I do feel like we forget as partners that when we do give something up, that they want to feel successful too. And it's not exactly like you said, it's not going to be necessarily the way that we do it, but that it doesn't matter because you're just trying to reinforce that behavior of, yes, I want you to help out. I need you to help out. And we can divide and conquer this because this is our family, this is our time. And I think that is really important. And we can't underscore how much that will reinforce partnering with the person in the relationship with you or them feeling defeated and feeling like you don't want my help. And that's a slippery slope, I feel like, when you go down that road. So I do feel like we do have to let things go and it's not going to be the way that we want it to be. And that's okay. That's the only way it can be because we can't do it all by ourselves.
And I think that the other part of it is that a lot of times very early on, I would criticize my husband and say, no, you didn't do it. You need to do it this way or that way. And a lot of times he would stop doing it because he said, I just don't know how to. And I think that's unfair. And that's something that we definitely have to make sure that we're being considerate of our partner and allowing them to have that space.
And I think that the other piece of that too is that if I think there's a dynamic that if we feel that they don't want to do it or they don't do it as well as we do, and if we don't control our own urge, we will take on more And I think that our partners, for whatever reason, a multitude of reasons, will let us take it on too. And so I think that's like a negative pattern too, because if we don't let it be, then our tendency would be to take on more. And then now we're just in a self defeating pattern, right? We're alienating our spouse and we are becoming even more mentally exhausted by all the things that we would do. And I think that there are women that I have seen who would rather do it themselves. And whether they realize what they're doing or they are more controlling. But what ends up happening is that somewhere down the line, there is this just not fitting together anymore. And for resentments or past failures or whatever, I have found that some of those couples just find that they can't continue together because now too much has happened, or the woman feels like she's now carrying 80% of the household, whether she took that on herself or not. And she feels that her husband is not willing to help, even though she might have had a lot to do with that kind of message that whatever he's going to do is not going to be good enough. And so I have seen relationships fall apart because one or the other partner did not feel like their needs were being met or they're not being heard. But you do have to be fair to your partner and understand what your role is in that. Because I have seen plenty of women who alienate their spouse because it's not good enough or not to their standards. And they're frustrated and they take it back, but then they've created that dynamic themselves because if it's not perfect, then they're not going to accept it. And I have seen that happen. And it's unfortunate because both parties are very angry at the other party, but they don't really understand what their role in that was, which doesn't necessarily bode well for the future relationships that either one of these people might have. So I know that's a pretty dramatic statement. I don't know if you have any reaction to that, Alyssa.
No, I think that definitely it's something that I'm obviously trying to avoid, but I think that it's a process. It's a process to be able to recognize that. And so I think like the first step is recognizing it and then making steps to remedy that. And I think that's where, and I think that I think for me, recognizing that the overload and the mental weight of everything that I was doing just got to be too much. And it took a toll on my physical health and I'm still trying to climb out of that. And I recognize that if I don't allow for some of this to be divided, it can definitely create more and more problems, both physically and emotionally and psychologically. The other part of it, I was reading, just as a side note, I was reading about there was a wife who I think she had put out an article on Facebook or something, but I was just looking through my feed and she was talking about how in the back of her planner, she had written out a note to her husband and gave him all the passwords and where to find things and really to ensure that he knew that if something happened to her, this is where you go to get all of the information of all the things that I do that you don't do. And I was like, oh my gosh, I definitely need to do that because if something were to happen, I don't think that all of the emails for all of our bills and things come to my email address. It doesn't go to my husband's. So just basic getting into my email to get those bills to coordinate and paying all of the things, he could definitely figure it out, but it would be a lot easier if I had that kind of outline for him. So I think that's one of those things that we just don't realize. And so what it made me pause is recognizing all the things that I coordinate on a daily basis that I have just naturally done from the beginning of our relationship over 15 years ago, recognizing that if something were to happen, if these tasks are not divided properly, you really also leave your partner to sink or swim and really try to figure out things. And I think that does them a disservice too. So it's definitely something that we have to be cognizant of, or at least give them access to in some form so that they have that, because otherwise they're really put in such a predicament if something were to happen.
The other thing while you were talking, I was thinking about is when the woman has to be gone for any length of time, whether it's work responsibility, a conference, or something like that, we want to like double, triple, quadruple check that our partner has everything they need while we're gone so that we're not adding to the responsibility. And I think that what I have observed in my own family is that we're trying to work out every detail to the nth degree. And the guy is very laid back, like, we'll figure it out. Like, it'll be okay. Like, you just go and focus on your work or the conference or whatever, but don't worry about us. Like, we'll be okay. And I think that just that statement alone makes most women like freak out because they need that confidence to be able to go and separate and make sure that everything is taken care of. And you're almost like you're trying to manage from afar. And I don't think there's a single woman who would say that they went to their conference and leaving the kids behind and things not fully resolved and that you're going to not be distracted by what's going on at home. Like just second guessing, is everything okay? Is my phone going to ring? Is what's going to happen? Is the cavalry going to be called in? And does that mean that family is going to help out? And is that going to reflect on me? And like, I just feel that, but I think it goes back to, Alyssa, what you were talking about, how men and women are different and how our brains are different. Men are so much more likely just to wing it. That's what I think of as, leaving when I had a young child and was my spouse going to be able to handle everything and just feeling guilty that I had to go, but at the same time dreaming about going and getting away from everything. But yet I wasn't 100% present because I was worried about what was going on at home.
Yeah, I haven't in the particular, trip that you're talking about, I actually had my mother-in-law come into town, because I felt better knowing that she was there, because her and we have very similar personalities, and so I said, as long as she was there, she would help run the household and things would go much smoother versus if I just left it, in my husband's hands. Was he capable of doing it? Absolutely. He could have probably done it, but again, done it differently, but not wrong. But this year I do have conferences, but I decided to bring him along with the babies. Again, a different take on things, but I definitely think that those particular instances, especially when not even when I'm going to be gone for long periods of time, but just like an evening where I'm going to go out with friends, not so much. I think he's coming into his element where he's able to manage things and knows what's to do. In years past, I would get a text message within 5 minutes of sitting down for dinner of how do I take care of this, or what time does the baby need to go to sleep, or definitely like you said that you're away, but the anxieties of that definitely start to creep in.
Yeah. And I think that we've covered a lot of what we wanted to do. One of the things I wanted to mention was the article, How an Unfair Division of Labor Hurts Your Relationship. Inequality in a Couple Can Impact Everyone's Happiness. It's by Jill Thutti, and it was published November 5th, 2019. And so the article is really helpful in being able to look at what the evolution of women and men's roles in a marriage has evolved since when majority of the women were staying home to now where it's a lot more women, really over 50% that are working outside the home, but also having a greater burden of the family responsibility in addition to working outside the home. And Alyssa said early on, this is a conversation that has cycled in and out of our conversation over the last year and a half almost that we've been doing this podcast. And I suspect that it'll come back up again at another time. And so as we wrap this up, just wanted to remind our listeners that you can always reach out to us by our Facebook Deconstructed Woman podcast or by thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com. And Alyssa and I are always looking for topic suggestions, your feedback about the podcast content that we're having, and anything you'd like to hear about in the future. We're always open for ideas. And so I want to take this chance to thank everybody for supporting us, and having loyal listeners is really important to us. And so with that, I'm signing off for Alyssa Marie and myself and saying thank you for joining us. And until next time, give us your feedback and stay in communication with us. Thanks so much. Goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.